All aboard! Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, football fans of all ages, I am Beast Mike, and you have now arrived at my train of thought. It's also time to ask the question once again, where do we go from here? Let's talk about the AFC South. So we got the first AFC division to do in this series. Let's get to business. And we'll start with the team that has the first overall pick in Tennessee. But how did we get here? How did we get to Tennessee having this pick? How did we get to Tennessee having this honor? Well, there's a good amount of memes. Will Levis delivered mistake after mistake after mistake and inno after inno after inno. And I think we should have known that things were going to go bad for the Titans with the first really, really bad one that he threw this past season. The pick six against Chicago, and Manson's on bending knee like boys to men because he realized what he had just done. It was a terrible look, and from then on, it felt like Tennessee never looked back, or looked ahead, or moved forward. With the football, they didn't really do that. They were seventh from the bottom in terms of yards per game. It was not great. They, passing game-wise, you would think it would be terrible, and it kind of was, and they were actually seventh from the bottom, so at least they're consistent. The running game was actually not awful. Tony Pollard did run for 1,000 yards or so, but they were still in the bottom third of the league, so it just wasn't a good look all around. Tennessee's offense, not great, even though Nick Westbrook-Akine actually developed into a solid receiver. Calvin Ridley was a pretty good number one. The problem is the whole needing a good quarterback throwing him the football thing. That kind of came into play a lot this season for Tennessee, and scoring points for the Titans was not easy. In fact, they were the sixth worst at doing it per game, so it was not great. Tennessee's veteran leadership on defense still solid. It's still like Jeffrey Simmons is a very good D tackle. They did just let Harold Landry go, and he apparently signed with New England, or at least will be signing with New England. And in theory, the Titans improve almost everywhere. L'Jarius Sneed didn't have the impact that Tennessee really thought he could have had anywhere close to having. And that was another reason why things didn't go so well for a Tennessee team that I don't think anyone thought would actually contend, but they thought they would see some sort of progress. And to be honest, it just never came. Maybe it'll come in free agency. Maybe it'll come in the offseason here. Now, Tennessee, in terms of salary cap space, they have a good amount of it. They are right ahead of Detroit. It's kind of where I left off here with the Lions. And they're going to be ninth in terms of cap space with $60.3 million. They don't have the most in this division. I'll get to that team in a sec. Tennessee's got a lot of holes. Obviously, one at quarterback. Obviously, at game-changing players. I would argue a pass rusher will be needed to replace Harold Landry. Oh, speaking of which, Abdul Carter's in play. A quarterback may be needed instead of Will Levis. Oh, Cam Wardle or Sanders are in play. You have the number one overall pick, so you have your choice in the matter. But what's the choice to make if you're Tennessee? Do you go QB of the future, or do you punt and hope and pray that one of the good QBs coming in next year's draft are going to be falling to you? What do you do if you're Tennessee? Draft. Speaking of the draft, let's talk about it for the Titans' perspective. Tennessee, as I've mentioned several times, first overall pick, they have their choice. They have their own pick in round 2 and in round 4. They don't have their own in round 3. They do have Seattle's pick in round 4, though, so they may be able to trade up those two picks. They have their pick in round 5 as well as the Chiefs. And then they have their pick in round 6 and Green Bay's pick in round 7. That Chiefs pick, I do believe, is the DeAndre Hopkins trade, but they did give up a pick to Kansas City for the L'Jarius Sneed trade. So that's kind of where Tennessee is right now in their situation, and there's a lot to work with here. There's a lot they have to do, I should say. There's not really so much to work with. There's a lot Tennessee's got to do to really get back into any sort of contention. How quickly can they get there? I think they're in the weakest division in football. I do think this is the weakest division here. But Tennessee being the weakest team in it doesn't really say much now, does it? We should have known the Jacksonville season was going to go bad because of week 1. And they were dominating the Dolphins early. And it looked like they were going for the kill shot. And then Travis Etienne fumbles the ball Great play by Javon Holland. Miami recovers it, and the very next play was two into Tyreek for an 80-yard touchdown, and the Dolphins snatched all the momentum and then eventually the game. From then on, we should have known the Jacksonville season was effectively done. Trevor Lawrence was not good and is kind of overhyped, to be honest. They had a great second half of the year in 2022 and a good first half of the year in 2023. That's about it when it came to Trevor Lawrence. Since the injury and the loss to the Bengals in 2023, the Jags have not been the same. Neither was Lawrence. Christian Kirk was not the same. He's now gone and traded to a team that I'm going to talk about in a little bit. It's been a miserable time for Jacksonville over the last, let's say, 16 months, or at least the last 16 NFL months, not counting this offseason. It's been a downright horrible time for a Jaguar team that needed to do something and get the momentum going after self-destructing and crumbling to lose out on the playoffs. They've got some good, redeemable things the Jaguars do, however. Etienne has shown himself to be a solid running back, but the real star of the offense is Brian Thomas. An amazing rookie year, year one, no matter who the quarterback was, whether it was Trevor Lawrence or Mac Jones. And even Mac Jones threw him touchdown passes. Kind of wild. But a great performance by Brian Thomas. Great year. And other than him and Josh Hines-Allen and Trayvon Walker, not much. I do like Andre Sisco. I do like Andre Sisco's a good player, and Alua Kung is a good linebacker. Like they've got a couple pieces here and there, but the team as a whole is just not doing things well. Here's proof of this. The Jaguars' offense was not good, and it's barely ahead of Tennessee in terms of their total yards per game. That's not great. Their passing yards, okay, you would think Jacksonville with Trevor Lawrence would be good. The good news is they were second in their division. The bad news is they were still in the bottom 10 of the league. The AFC South is not great at the whole passing thing. Running the ball, you would think, okay, maybe somewhere Jacksonville. No, that's still not great. They're the 7th worst in terms of running the football. That's not great. And let's see, they probably didn't score too many points. That's the case here as well. They were 7th from the bottom in terms of points. At least they're consistent. 7. Let's go to the defense, where the Jacksonville defense was not good. Only Carolina gave up more yards per game, so it was pretty bad. It showed sometimes. There were games where Jacksonville just didn't try, and it reflected in terms of the score, where teams were able to put up a bunch of points. They were the worst in terms of pass defense, so getting some secondary help would be probably good. And run defense, they weren't as bad. They weren't even the worst in their division. Actually, they were better than Tennessee, so that's saying something. Still 8th from the worst, and that's still not great. So in theory, where it's bad, very bad, worst, very bad, super bad, not even the McLovin kind, you would think they would have given up a lot of points. They did. They were the 5th worst in the league in terms of points per game. It was not great. This indeed was the worst in their division. So Jacksonville was not very good, and I think it's the easiest way to describe this. And now the real question is, how does Jacksonville fix this? How does Liam Cohen fix Trevor Lawrence the same way he helped continue to keep the momentum going from Baker Mayfield? What does he do after the Cons paid him a bunch of money? That screams AEW storyline. If AEW doesn't do something like that, I'd be really disappointed. They traded Christian Kirk a day after it looked like they were going to release him. Evan Ingram is no longer there, and that's kind of disappointing because Ingram was a good tight end. What does Jacksonville do? What did they do with Brandon Sheriff? I believe he's a free agent now, and he may not be back in Duval. That's not great. What is great is Jacksonville's cap room, though. They have the 8th most in the league, so barely ahead of their rival in Tennessee, and it's by about $600,000. They have $60.9 million in cap. Now, if years past have taught us anything, the Jaguars are going to spend money. They are known to do that. Do they spend it wisely? Usually no, but they will try, and they will spend. I can respect that. The Jaguars, in terms of their draft picks, and they could use a lot of help on defense and or the offensive line, which also allowed Trevor Lawrence to take a horrible beating. So in theory, that's where the 5th overall pick is going to go. They also can use help on the defensive line because, as I told you, their defense was pretty trash. They don't need pass rushers per se. They have 2 good ones, but they could definitely use some help up the middle. Mason Graham, he could be the pick here. That would also be very good. They also have their picks in every round, and they have 3 more picks. They have rounds 3 and 4 from Minnesota. Good dealing there. And then round number 6, they have Seattle's pick. So Jacksonville can go to work here and try to rebuild this roster on the fly and see if they could do anything before Trevor Lawrence's massive money deal truly kicks in. Not that the Cons can't pay for it with some of the AEW money. That would probably explain some things. Can Jacksonville get back on track? Because last year was an abject disaster in pretty much all of the worst ways possible. Can they fix it? Can they get things up and running? Welcome to Russian Roulette, the team. These are the Colts, who, to be honest, played with fire way too much. They play with fire against bad teams. They play with fire against good teams. They play with fire against mediocre teams. And for some reason, in some way, shape, form, or fashion, the Colts would find a way to survive and advance most of these games. Anthony Richardson, as questionable as he is as a quarterback, found a way to out-talent his opposing defense and find a way to win in some of these cases. In other cases, it was just straight up luck or straight up timing when Indianapolis played some teams. That's just how the Colts operated and did business. Pretty much every close game, except for maybe 1 or 2, Indianapolis got it done. Everything was in play for Indianapolis to make the playoffs. All they had to do was not self-destruct. And it felt like, to be honest, the Colts kind of didn't recover from Jonathan Taylor fumbling against Denver. And then the Broncos took over that game and absolutely destroyed Indy in the second half of that battle in Denver. Anthony Richardson was awful in that game, and that pick 6 was kind of wild. Sure, they beat Tennessee, but that was a blowout that turned into a real close game despite Taylor redeeming himself. And then the humiliation happened. The Giants. Yikes. Drew Lock must have had the entire Young Cheesy catalog playing through the speakers in his helmet as he was dicing up the Colts the entire game. They gave up 41 to a awful Giants team. I do mean awful. Actually, 45. I shortchanged them. They gave up 45 to an awful Giants team, and really 38 because 7 was off the kickoff return. But you get the idea. Drew Lock could not be stopped. He was careering. And Joe Flacco was self-destructing. And Indianapolis got humiliated at MetLife Stadium, and that's how they missed the playoffs. Never mind the fact that they beat Jacksonville. The other thing that we know about the Colts, and we have learned about them over the last decade, death, taxes, a different quarterback almost every year, and the fact that you can't win in Duval. These are the rules that Indianapolis has abided by. These are the rules they have chosen to set for themselves. It's just what they do. As for what Indianapolis actually did in terms of their production, they were actually decent offensively, believe it or not. It's surprising, but I would imagine a lot of this is the run game. 13th overall in terms of total yardage. All right, pretty good. And then we'll look at the passing. And we should probably look away from the passing. Believe it or not, Indianapolis was very much towards the bottom of the league, which probably shouldn't surprise most of you. They were the 8th worst team in the league. Better than Tennessee, but not as good as Jacksonville. It makes sense. Anthony Richardson hasn't developed as a passer. Joe Flacco is old. Okay, I guess that makes sense. Now, rushing should probably save Indianapolis because Jonathan Taylor is still a beast. And a beast he still is. Indianapolis was 8th in the league, 8th best, I should say, in terms of rushing yards per game. Jonathan Taylor will definitely do that. He's like that. Points per game, where you would think Indianapolis would be either mid-tier to below average. They are in the mid-tier group. They are in the middle of the pack in the league in terms of points, slightly behind Pittsburgh, but ahead of Seattle. And believe it or not, ahead of Houston, who I didn't talk about yet. That's kind of wild. And the other startling thing here is that the Colts average the most points per game in the division. That's a little wild, but it's the truth. It happened. Men lie, women lie, numbers don't. And the numbers aren't lying here. Speaking of numbers, let's talk about the financial ones. Indianapolis is actually slightly behind the Packers here. $40.3 million in cap. They look to be in the above average tier. They're above average situations here with the cap room. And the Colts have some things to work here. They're actually 17th in terms of cap, so it's not bad. They have some things to work on, obviously. Do they go get a quarterback in a later round? They need a number one corner in the worst way possible. They also need some help in terms of stopping the run for DeForest Buckner. They also could use an edge rusher because it just doesn't feel like Indianapolis has that prime number one guy there. I imagine the Colts are going to pursue these things when the free agency period starts and/or the NFL draft. I don't think the Colts are super far away. I think their roster is actually fairly stable. It's just not high-end enough to truly compete in the AFC. Can Indianapolis fix these problems? Time will tell. And then there's Houston, where a lot of us kind of sort of expected the Texans to take that step forward, right? C.J. Stroud had an amazing rookie year. Will Anderson was dominant on defense. They were the two rookies of the year. D'Amico Ryans was a tremendous coach. It felt like Houston hit a home run with 3 of the 5 most important positions in football on a football field: head coach, quarterback, and edge rusher. They also got an all-pro corner in Derek Stingley Jr. Now, he wasn't that in 23, but he became that in 24. Kwame Lassiter was excellent on the other side of him, too. Houston's got 2 nasty young corners, and Jalen Petrie has a really good safety. Houston's kind of sort of set up on the back end of the defense. And in the middle and the front end of the defense, Houston's still also very productive. I mentioned Will Anderson. Daniel Hunter did his thing. Their defense will hit you, and it'll hit you hard, and sometimes dirty. Because Shahir did that. He got his deal restructured. Good player. Dirty one, though. Let's keep it a buck. Where I think Houston had their problems is that Stroud naturally took a step back, and he wasn't the same rookie Stroud that he was as sophomore Stroud. He made some mistakes, obviously. He threw some innos. It just wasn't great. And part of it probably because the receivers he was trying to throw to was a revolving door due to the injuries. Tank Dell's knees, it's heartbreaking to see Tank Dell's situation play out the way it is. And I don't know where he goes from here, honestly. I don't know how healthy he will be going forward. It's just painful to see that he just can't stay healthy. Stephon Diggs, who was brought in to be a help for the Texans, and he blew out his knee. And he was out for the year. Nico Collins had some issues with the injury bug, and he missed some time. And thank goodness for Joe Mixon. Otherwise, this Texans offense would just not be great. Even in this offensive line is just awful. Laramie Tunsil aside, the offensive line, no bueno. And Tunsil did commit a lot of penalties this year, by the way. That's a little concerning. All these factors that I just explained when it came to Houston's offense led to the Texans being surprisingly below average in terms of the passing game. They were the 13th worst in the league in terms of total yards produced per game. In terms of the passing stats, yeah, right about the same. Houston did not produce the passing yards per game as much as they did in 23. Now, rushing yards, they were above average. Pretty good there. Pretty solid. Joe Mixon was a godsend for that Texan offense. Imagine him behind a good offensive line. They would be good. And they would be very capable of putting up points. Which, Houston, to be fair, actually, to be honest, they were kind of slightly below average in terms of putting points up. Still, even with all these issues and all these problems, and maybe they're just in the right division to have these problems, their defense got it done. 5th best defense in terms of total yards. They were getting it in. They had 3 really good dudes in the secondary, and this is why their pass defense was 6th best. So you could tell Houston was getting busy, and they were taking the rock from you, and they were making sure that they were stopping you. They were also 9th best in terms of stopping the run. I should say 11th best in terms of stopping the run. So Houston's defense was high tier. Very impressive. They were also in the top half of the game in terms of total points. They were 14th. Very good defense. Houston was really getting it done on that end to save them from an offense that just happened to regress due to their injuries. Rather unfortunate. So, what do the Texans do? In theory, they're going to go after a receiver, right? Well, they somewhat addressed a little bit of that need. But I'll get to that when we get to the draft. And I'm going to get to Houston's cap space right now. The Texans are currently walking into this offseason with not a lot of cap space, as in almost no cap space, unfortunately. They are the best team as of this moment in time. They're the worst team with actual cap space. That is the sixth worst in the NFL with $5.2 million in space. So Houston's going to have to do a little bit of restructuring to do a little bit of something when it comes to this offseason, because they got some things to fix. One of them they might have already addressed. They've already traded for Christian Kirk and only gave up a 7th-round pick to do it. That's impressive. So Kirk could join Nico Collins if he's healthy as your 2 primary receivers. This may spell the end of Stephon Diggs, but unfortunately things just didn't work out, and sometimes that happens. The Texans are in the middle, are picking 25th, and obviously because of the whole winning the division thing and getting to the divisional round and basically taking the ball from Justin Herbert at every waking moment, that else would be good. They have their own pick in every round except for the 7th, as I mentioned, and except for the 5th, 6th, and 7th. They just traded the 7th away, so they have their own pick in the first 4 rounds. They have Buffalo's pick in round 5. As part of the Stephon Diggs compensation. So that's really where Houston is right now. In theory, the Texans are the best team in this division. They absolutely have the best defense. They definitely have the best quarterback. They probably have the best coach. But how long will this last? So that'll wrap up the AFC South version of this video. Coming up next will be the NFC West. So we're back to the NFC and we're going westward for the Seahawks, the Niners, the Rams, and the Cardinals. Surprisingly, San Francisco, you will be the first stop of my next train of thought.